All right, we'll make a start. So as I said earlier, I'm Andrew Manners. We have John Duff taking questions. Thank you for attending the webinar. This is our second webinar in the first year of the series of webinars for the Building Resilience and On-Farm Biosecurity Nursery Project. It is a levy-funded project, and first up we'll go into a brief amount of detail as to what other aspects of the project we cover. Then we'll get into the actual webinar, go through the use of the APVMA website, searching for registrations and Infopest. We'll talk about the effects of pesticides on pests and beneficials, and talk about pesticide resistance and how to avoid it. All right. So it is a nursery levy funded project. So HIA, Queensland Government and NGIA all put in funds to have this project be run. We are providing fact sheets or writing documents, fact sheets, pest management plans and various other documents to support the nursery industry. We provide diagnostics at a discount or complimentary for NIASA accredited nurseries. You get 10 per year of the project, and the project goes until 2020. Besides the webinars, we also are running workshops in each state and territory each year of the project, and we've almost finished the first year's lot of workshops. We provide biosecurity support in the form of contingency plans and back-end biosecurity support to very many meetings and whatnot. And one way you can see when these documents that are relevant to you are becoming available is to look at the NGIA newsletter or go to the website, the NGIA website. The easiest way to find those fact sheets and pest management plans on the NGIA website is simply to search for fact sheets in their search engine or pest management plans, and you should be able to find them pretty easily. Okay, so we're going to head over to the APVMA Pubcris database. This is what it looks like, and just bear with me while I move across. Hopefully this works. Beautiful. Okay, so what we're going to do is just go through the process. This is live, and thankfully there are no server problems at their end, so we can do this. So we'll type in caterpillar and nursery. You'll see down here that there are some things that pop up. I wouldn't recommend using the things that pop up, the terms that pop up there, as it will probably limit your search. Then we have a host and a pest, and you hit search. Now, only 15 product registrations have popped up, and to me that seems pretty low. So we're going to change this to ornamental. Okay, you can see more things have popped up, but those will limit your search and stop you from seeing the full range of products that are available. So we'll hit search again, and now we have 155 results. That's much better. So at this point, there are a few things to note. At the top of my screen, I have it set to 75 items per page. I prefer having the most items per page because then you don't have to scroll through as many pages. You can also see the column labels become highlighted as you put your mouse over it. I prefer to have the products sorted by active ingredient. And I've just hit that twice to make it alphabetical from A to Z. So then you can go through and it's grouped all the acephate, all the alpha cypermethrin, azadirachtin, and so on and so forth. Okay, so at this point there are a number of different other options. You can export all of the products if you wish without looking at any more detail of individual lines. And we'll do that in a moment just so that you can see what it's like. But first of all, we'll hit View Label. Then it comes up with this disclaimer screen. You hit the Accept the Disclaimer and you get to the actual label. Some labels are quite long. This one's relatively short, so you can scroll down and you can see ornamentals, aphids, Heliothis, Helicoverpa. So that's how you've gotten your ornamental and caterpillar, because Helicoverpa is a caterpillar. So that's why that label has come up. To get back to your search screen, you have to hit the back button. Then it brings you straight back to your search. We'll go to another one because I'd like to illustrate a point that is worth noting for the APVMA search engine. So this is the Chlorpyrifos registration, and I'm just going to scroll down to the ornamental listing, which does take some time in this case. Here it is. Okay, it says potted ornamentals, scarab beetle larvae. So that's not caterpillars. So what's happened here is it's searched and it's found these ornamentals. You have ornamentals on the label, that's true, and you have caterpillars on the label, but it hasn't married up the ornamentals and caterpillars. So you do have to make sure that you check each label and don't just assume that because it's listed in that gross listing, where I'll go back to now, that you can use it. Now, one aspect of the APVMA search engine that I quite like, it's probably my favorite, is this View Details button. So we'll go down to one, we'll hit View Details, and it gives details of that product listing. It's just taking its time, thinking for a moment, getting ready to load up, hopefully very soon. Once we get to that View Details, the thing that I like that will pop up in a moment, I hope, is that you can hit the Host Pest tab, and given that it's not coming up, I'm going to hit a different one, just in the hope that that particular label might not have been working properly and a different one will. It was working a moment ago before the webinar. Let's, come on. It's typical. All right, what we're going to do is I'll demonstrate the exports to CSV, and then hopefully in the background this APVMA website will load up. So I'm going to hit the export to CSV. And this too is having issues. All right, so what I'll do is I'll describe what's happened, and at the same time I'm going to go to my fallback position, which was screenshots. When you hit that, I'm just loading up a different bear with me for a moment. All right. When you hit the export to CSV, this is what you will get. You will get a spreadsheet that has lots of different columns and a lot of information that may well be useful to you, but it is a lot of information to take in, and it's not necessarily in the best possible form. So unless you have a specific purpose for hitting that button, it may not be all that helpful, but it is there and it could be useful. And here is the View Details. The View Details button summarizes the label in a way. So if you hit View Detail and then this Host Pest tab, you can see for this particular label, which happens to be Lancer, it has your host plants and the different pests that are registered on that host plant. Okay, and in this case it's ornamental and aphid helicoverpa. Okay, at this point what we're going to do is take questions. So if you would like to type into your question box any questions that have anything you would like to ask regarding the APVMA website, and what we're going to do is hopefully go back. Oh, look at that, APVMA portal unavailable. Let me see if I can. What questions have we got, John?
Andrew, first one is, how often should I look for new registrations or minor use permits in Pubcris on the APVM website?
Okay, yes, minor use permits, that's good, thank you. I guess it really depends on your exact situation. If you have searched either the APVMA website or Infopest in the last year or so, I would suggest that you're probably all right. I would suggest every 6 to 12 months it may be worthwhile having another little look to see if there are new products available, particularly when they're from different mode of action groups that may be more IPM friendly. So yeah, 6 to 12 months perhaps. Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, we're not going to be able, just on that point as well, the minor use permits, you have to search separately. What I'll do is go back to the screenshot here, which will come up in a moment. If you notice where my cursor is, you have to search for permit search, and then you have basically the same options. You hit host and pest, and a number of registrations will come up. All right, we'll come back to that, and hopefully within a half an hour or so, towards the end of the webinar, hopefully that will work. Other questions, John?
No, that's it at the moment.
Okay.
You've bamboozled them all.
Okay. So what we'll do is we'll go to the Infopest database, which appears to be working, and at that point you hit the host button. It's a little bit more complicated. There are more buttons to press, but your search is more refined in some ways, at least. So we'll do the same search, caterpillar. You can't hit caterpillar and nursery or ornamental. In this case, you're just searching for the host. The host is not a caterpillar, I'm sorry. Ornamental. Ornamental. And what will come up is all of the listings that have ornamentals. So you can click individual buttons or individual rows, and you can see the number of products that fit into that row. Or you can go down towards the bottom right and select the whole page. And then all of the rows will come up. And you hit Go to Problems in the bottom left-hand corner. The first time I was doing this, I did have to sort of look around And it took me a few moments before I went, that's where I go next. So we hit go to problems, and what will come up now is all of the different problems, not just insect, but fungal, weeds, all of the different problems associated with all of those different ornamental listings. So then you have to narrow down your search, and we hit caterpillar, and you hit the arrow or return, enter, and it searches for a little while and goes, okay, here are all my lepidopterans or caterpillars. If you know exactly what pest you're dealing with, you could hit specific species and situations. But if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with, it can be useful to hit select page. Then, once you're happy with all of your selections, you hit go to products, also in the bottom left-hand corner. And like the APVMA website, you get the option of sorting your active ingredients, which is my preferred method for searching for pesticides, because they're all mixed up at the moment, and it makes it easier to determine what's there and what isn't there. Okay, now we've got a lot of information. You've got your company, the brand, the trade name, the active ingredient, and if you scroll over to the right, we'll move so we have active ingredient, you can see the mode of action group, the states that they're registered in, and the pack type. So H stands for home, C stands for commercial, and the CH is both commercial or home and home. So that is useful information at the outset. And you can also see, oops, here we go, if we go back to the left, you can see that you have an L for label, you have an M for MSDS, and you have a P for permit. So that's the minor use permit. So you get your searches for the labels, the registrations, and your minor use permits all in one go. Right, so now another thing which you can do with the APVMA, you can open up a number of these labels at once simply by right-clicking on the label, and you go open in new link. If you want to do the permit at the same time, you can open it up in a new tab. You can do as many as you want, and then you can look at them in more detail, just as per with the APVMA. And here you have ornamentals, aphids and Iliothis or Helicoverpa. For the minor use permit, this permit is a relatively recent permit, came out 30th of September. You can see who applied for that permit, so NGIA. You have a very brief overview of that permit. This is quite a large permit, one of the largest I've seen, but a very useful permit for the nursery industry, because it covers a wide number of groups, a wide range of groups, and a large number of products. You'll also note down to the bottom the jurisdictions. It's all of the different jurisdictions except for Victoria, because Victoria is special. They have different laws, so they don't need to use this permit. Their legislation allows them to use all the products on this permit and others, in fact, as in a similar way to having the permit there. However, even if you were in Victoria, the permits give you a good suggestion, an indication of what is useful, what will work against certain pests. So we'll head down, you have to scroll down. These here, this is some of the products. that are on. These are some of the products that are listed, and it is quite a long list. Eventually you will get down to some of the more specific listings. You have mites, weevils and grasshoppers, beetles, and all of the different ones that are there. Don't think we need to go into any more detail. You can look at those in your own time. So we'll head back to Infopest. You have the option of exporting to Excel, and I might do that to illustrate it because it is a very similar process as per the APVMA. And it's downloaded in the box on the left-hand side of my browser, and Excel opens up. I'm just reducing the size of some of these columns. There is a lot of information here. And eventually, if you look carefully, you will get a column, claim. This is effectively the description column, and it has a very brief description of what that label has on it. Since the nursery industry is quite diverse, some nurseries in certain instances will be able to use a label that isn't specifically for ornamental crops, but maybe for vegetables or forestry, and that's just fine. You just need to be careful and make sure that the label does suit your needs. Okay, but however, this export is still, in my opinion, not as good as the APVMA host pest details listing, which is actually it's excellent, that summary. All right, we'll head back to our presentation. And are there any questions at this point? John, do we have questions? John?
There we go. How's that?
That's much better.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for getting best search results?
Okay. We'll head back to here. Okay, we'll just hit home and go to host. I find it's easier to be more general and cast a wide net and then exclude the products later. So if we had a host of, let's say, gum trees, even if you were a forestry nursery, I might still put in ornamental, because this will incorporate a lot of nursery settings. You could, instead, if you wanted to, put in forestry, but it may not encapsulate everything. So you get forests. We do have the nurseries. You have pre-plant, but then you also have your timber production. So if you're a nursery, so here you have forest nurseries, nursery plant stock, trees ornamental may well be helpful. So cast as wide a net as you can. You may want to search in different ways, because while the databases are good, sometimes our exact needs are not easily searched for. So just cast a wide net, search in different ways, and narrow down your search from there. I think that's the biggest tip.
And I guess that leads on to this other question. How are the two sites different, and how should they be used for different purposes? So is one better than the other, or do you use them sort of together?
Okay. The APVMA web search is quite simple and it's fast. Let's see if it's running. Woohoo! It's there. Okay. So because you can hit host and pest and do a fairly blast search, in some ways that can be a good start. So that is certainly a difference. And since we're here, so let's do whitefly ornamental search. We have 195 listings. We're going to sort it. All right, so there are a lot of different products there, and we're going to hit view details of a random one and go to host pest. And then you can see this is excellent. I like this. And that can provide a pretty good indication as to whether it's going to be useful fairly quickly, because searching through labels can be time consuming. One thing which I would like to see the APVMA do is incorporate a search which does both your product search and your permit search. And since it's now available, we'll do that. Whitefly, ornamental, search, and we have a number 49, but some of them are no longer active. And one thing we can do here is put on the filter. So you hit the button filter, and let's just go to current registrations, because we're not particularly interested in the ones that aren't current. Okay, here we are. Now we only have 3. However, I happen to know... Sorry, John?
I guess that leads to one of these other questions that's come in. How do growers know if they need to have a permit?
Okay. So all of the pesticides have a registration, a label. If you want to apply a product for a purpose which isn't on that label and you're not in Victoria, then you need to have a minor use permit to use that product for your proposed purpose legally. So the minor use permit allows you, it effectively extends the label to incorporate the things that are the host plants and the pests that are on that label. Hopefully that answers the question. Basically, you need a label or a minor use permit to use any product unless you're in Victoria, and they have quite some specific laws. And if you're in Victoria, it's worthwhile becoming very familiar with those laws. They're available on the, if you do a search through their local Department of Ag.
Yep, I think that covers that one.
What I might just illustrate here with the APVMA permit search, which is a difference between the APVMA and the Infopest search engine. If we simply go ornamentals, because 3 minor use permits, I happen to know that there are other minor use permits available for whiteflies, and we hit search. For the APVMA, this is my preferred method to search for permits, and it is quite useful. You can then click on the date issued, and it will sort the permits based on the time, or the year when they were selected. Now in this case, we've gotten a lot more, 27, and we can hit 75 with the number of records per items per page, and then you will get more products on that page. You only have to scroll through one page. Still, the search, I happen to know that there is another whitefly minor use permit. So let's hit nursery and do search. Now we have 29, and there are issued date, so sort it by date, and there are some additional ones here. So for the minor use permits on the APVMA website, you have to search in more than one way, nursery and ornamental, and you'll get all of the different minor use permits that come up. And to me, it's worthwhile doing that search every 6 to 12 months, particularly if you're having difficulty in spraying a particular pest consistently and you want to improve your management. Okay.
I think that's all the questions for the moment, Andrew.
All right. We will move along then to how pesticides kill insects and mites. All right. So each pesticide from a mode of action group, from each mode of action group, has a different mode of action. Rather, all the pesticides from one mode of action group attack and kill insects and mites in one method. So some products attack the synapse. In the nerve poisons, they stop the nerve pulse from moving from one nerve cell, to the next nerve cell. And if you don't have those impulses moving from nerve cell to nerve cell, it causes major problems, as it would for us. In the same fashion, some products are axonic poisons, where they will attack the individual nerve cell. It stops the nerve pulse from moving down an individual cell. So they're similar but different. There are a number of other different modes of action that are not nerve poisons, and these are growing. In fact, the different types of nerve poisons and the non-nerve poisons, they are increasing over time as pesticide researchers create more pesticides. So some products are immature growth regulators. The process of molting for an insect and mites is quite specific. If you stop a particular function from occurring, stop a process from occurring, the insect is likely to die. If you stop energy production, the formation of ATP, you're going to kill that insect. And some pesticides will block muscle function, and if you can't move, eventually you're going to die. Other products, some of your biopesticides work in different manners. For example, BT products, so your dipels, your vectorbacs, they work a little bit differently. The bacteria is ingested, it releases a toxin, and that toxin is actually what kills the individual. Fungal products have their hyphae penetrate the cuticle of the insect and will then eventually kill the individual. There is quite a lot of information available on the mode of action of different pesticides, and each pesticide, when it's being developed, there is generally research to work out what mode of action group it falls into, because that is important in terms of insecticide resistance. And there is a lot of information at the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee website. So if you search for you do a web search for IRAC and pesticide resistance, you'll find a lot of information. Now, the product has to contact the individual in one way or another, and the way that these different products contact individual pests or beneficials is slightly different. So you have your obvious direct spray contacting the integument, so it's applied, it touches the insect directly, and then can move through the integument and have an effect on the insect or the individual. You have indirect spray contact. If you apply it to a crop and then an individual, walks onto the crop, some products have a highly residual activity and it can still move into the insect, into the individual and cause negative effects for it. Some products can be ingested from the plant surface and then will have an effect. For example, your bacterial biopesticides, and other products which have a more systemic mode of action will be inside the plant cells, and when they're eaten can then start affecting the individual. Some products also have a vapor or fumigant action, so it's applied to a product. There is, we can all smell it when we are near that application. The insects can as well, and it sometimes will be taken up into the body via their respiration. They don't have lungs, they have a different mode, but it still goes into the body via the air intake. And depending on these different modes of action, or different modes of contact with the insect, you may want to alter your application technique. If you know you have a contact product, you probably don't want to apply it to a pest which is highly cryptic, which is in the growing tip or wrapped up in the leaf. You're not going to maximize your efficacy. You're more likely to want to use a systemic product, a product which moves up the plant. Generally, most of the systemic products available in Australia are upward systemic, so they can potentially be drenched into the roots and move up the leaves. There are some systemic products that move down, but I'm actually not aware of which one, if we have any in Australia for the nursery industry. And then there are also translaminar products which will have effectively limited systemic effects. They move, if it contacts the top of the leaf, it will move to the bottom of the leaf, but it won't move to a different leaf that wasn't also sprayed or applied, had the product applied to it. So all of these different factors may influence how you apply a particular product. And for that reason, in some of our fact sheets and pest management plans where it is most relevant, we have included tables like this. And there is a lot of information here, but in brief, we've got our mode of action group, active ingredient, an example product, and there will be potentially more than just these. And we have our action, your mode of action. Here we've summarized your contact. For C, it has systemic action as well. These products have ingested actions, and still other products that aren't listed on this particular slide will have fumigant action or translaminar action. We also provide some indication as the effect on beneficial populations and the residual effect of those products. If you want to know more information about beneficial insects, I'd recommend that you go to the NGIA YouTube channel and listen to the webinar that we did last fortnight around this time. Okay. Now, in terms of the effect of pesticides on beneficial insects and mites, almost all pesticides have a negative impact on beneficial populations. Even those products which are quite specific to particular pest groups, let's say generally only affecting aphids, in the case of a product like Pyramor, it will still have a slightly negative effect on beneficial populations. Most products, particularly those with a broad spectrum mode of action, will cause the death of the beneficial insects and mites. For some of these more specific IPM-friendly products that are coming out as time goes on, may have sub-lethal deleterious impacts. Now, I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but effectively what this means is let's say the adults may survive, but they don't live as long, or they don't produce as many offspring, or their activity is reduced, or they eat fewer prey items. So they're just not as effective as the individuals that live on a crop where a product hasn't been applied. In general, if you apply an IPM product multiple times, you will increase those negative impacts to the point where you may have to reapply your predator populations or have your beneficial populations reinvade your nursery. And it is important to know that certain products vary in their residual activity. If you recall back to the table that we just showed, and I might just go back to it here, it will pop up here. There it is. Some products, the research indicates that it has a medium to high impact on the populations, but it's only for 2 weeks. Other products maybe 1 to 3 weeks. There are some products, let's say some of the very IPM-friendly products, something like Success. If you apply your product and after that, after the application dries, then you put on your predator populations, there is extraordinarily small negative impacts, or it's basically negligible. Some other products like oils, that sort of a product will also have a similar effect. Some products, as it says here, will have a very long residual and will potentially limit your ability to use beneficial insects and mites for as long as 6 months, particularly in protected cropping environments. Okay, so the logical question that falls from this is, how do we conserve our beneficials? If possible, avoid applying products with long residual activity, and particularly products that have a broad spectrum activity. You can apply pesticides to hotspots. So it's only a small area of the nursery, and then also you can have refugia or companion cropping areas, gardens effectively with flowers that can bring in your beneficial insects, and they can do some of the work for you. Okay, so we'll stop for some questions at this point. So please type in any questions.
Got one here for you, Andrew. How do you know if the product you've got is a systemic or a contact?
All right, that's a good question, because in many cases the product labels don't include that information. Sometimes they do, and that's great. I'd prefer to see all products have whether it's a contact or a systemic product, and whether it has an ingested mode of action or a vapor fumigant mode of action. What you end up having to do is either look at some of the literature that's available, whether it be our fact sheets or other research papers. You are forced to search for that information for each individual product. And what's even more frustrating in some ways is some products are UV sensitive, and they're not necessarily stated directly on the label. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And obviously, if it's UV sensitive, then you're not going to want to apply that product in the morning. So it does pay, particularly if you're getting a product for the first time, or if you've never looked at the mode of action of that product that you've been using for a long time, it does pay to extract that information from trusted websites. So generally, university websites, industry fact sheets are normally pretty good. So universities, government websites, those sorts of trusted websites. And don't just look at one website if possible. It is good to look at a consensus. So sometimes if you type in your web browser, bifenthrin systemic, I found that that's often a good way of working out whether it's systemic or non-systemic. And it will often come up on a number of web pages, a bifenthrin is a non-systemic product and blah, 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 blah. So that's unfortunately the approach you have to take.
Well,
any other questions, John?
At the moment. No, that's all we've got at the moment, Andrew.
Okay.
I guess we can move on and hopefully we'll get more at the end.
That's right. All right, we've still got a little ways to go, so that's just fine. Okay, now we're going to talk about pesticide resistance. And what we'll do is, if you have encountered pesticide resistance, please raise your hand. Or if you think you've encountered pesticide resistance, the pesticide hasn't worked for whatever reason. Okay, yes, a few of you have. Thank you. All right. So, sorry, just technical difficulty here. Here we are. So what is pesticide resistance and how does it occur? So first of all, you need to know that pesticide resistance has a genetic basis. Some individuals simply have a pre-adaptation that stops the particular product from attacking the site that causes death. So, where pesticide resistance has been researched, it's been found that sometimes resistance can be caused by a breakdown of the toxin quickly within the body of the insect. So it breaks it down so fast that the product doesn't have time to cause the death of that individual. Sometimes it stops the insecticide from reaching the target site, whether that be if it has to go inside of a cell, perhaps it stops the channel or the membrane stops that active ingredient from moving to that site. Other times it's more of it stopping absorption, so the insect just doesn't absorb it. And still other times it's a behavioral resistance. They go, oh, I smell that product, I know what's coming, I'm going to hide. And they either stop feeding on the plant or move to protected areas. And when the risk is gone, when that sense, when the cue, the stimuli for the particular product being present is no longer present, they can move back into the crop or go to a different host plant altogether. So in some ways, you can think of insects as being quite clever. It's not that they're clever, it's just that they are pre-adapted and they want to live just like everyone else. Okay, so we have a little illustration here, which I enjoyed making. We have our susceptible individuals, and they're the unhappy individuals because they're going to die. And you have your resistant individuals. They're happy because they're less likely to die, at least from the application of the product. Most of the time, you have to do multiple applications over a period of time to cause resistance to occur. Okay, and eventually, let's say you have all of these individuals in a crop, and you've applied a number of times, and you wipe out the susceptible individuals, and you only have your happies left. What happens is your resistant individuals multiply, and you may have your odd unhappy one because maybe a susceptible individual has moved into the crop, or perhaps some of the resistant individuals have produced offspring which are not always resistant. But in general, if you have only resistant individuals present, they produce offspring with each other, and you're more likely to have more resistant individuals. So it's quite simple, and then you have a problem. So how do we avoid this resistance? There is a growing body of research and management strategies to avoid pesticide resistance. Using cultural strategies at all times is extremely important. If you avoid relying solely on pesticides, you're far less likely to cause pesticide resistance. If you rotate between at least 3 mode of action groups, there's no use in applying different active ingredients from the same mode of action, because they will cause the resistance factor to occur in the same way. But if you rotate between different mode of action groups, and the more the merrier, then you kill off your individuals that may have a little bit of resistance to the first product, but then the second product comes along and they may not have any predisposition to resistance to that product. And if maybe there's 1 or 2, then the third product comes along and you just reduce your risk. Applying products to have maximum efficacy. Now, that sounds obvious, but it may not always be straightforward. For example, if you have caterpillars present in a crop, but they're not active during the day, you want to make sure that your product goes on late in the afternoon, so that when they come out and feed, they're more likely to encounter that product. If your pest isn't present and you apply a product with only a contact and no residual activity, it's not going to have much effect. But you may still have a negative impact on your beneficial individuals present. Which comes to the next point, which is, oops, just go back, conserving beneficials. Resistance doesn't occur from or as a result of applying natural enemies. As a result, you need to be monitoring pests and beneficial populations so that you can reduce pesticide applications and apply them to hotspot areas. So applying to hotspots works, and I'll illustrate it in the following way. If you have block 1, it's a hotspot, lots of pests present, and you have mostly your susceptibles and a couple of resistant individuals here. Block 2 has a few individuals, but maybe it's a different host plant. You know that it's more tolerant. You can leave those there, or just keep on monitoring it to make sure that the population doesn't increase. Maybe there are more beneficials in block 2, and you think that it's likely that there won't be a problem. Okay, so you apply your pesticides to the hotspot. It knocks out, maybe over a period of time, all of your susceptibles. This is if you're only applying 1 product. Again, then insects and pests tend to move around. Even insects that have a very sedentary way of life have some way of moving at some point in their life cycle. So if they move from block 2 into block 1 and cross, normally resistance genes are recessive. So effectively, the susceptible individuals have genes which drown out the resistant genes, and you'll have more susceptible individuals present. So that is just a simple illustration of how applying to hotspots will reduce pesticide resistance. And there are some other benefits as well as reduced risk of resistance. You're applying less product, therefore it costs less. You have fewer risks associated with human health or environmental risks. You have less time taken, that translates to less cost. But if you're only applying to hotspots, you need to be monitoring more. If you wait until the hotspot is too big because you're not monitoring very well, well, you just compound your problem. You're better off monitoring lots so that you can take management actions to your hotspots at an early stage. Applying to hotspots preserves your beneficial insects and mites, and here on the right-hand side, the images, it's just a system where you have some psyllids, but you also have parasitized psyllids. This one has had a wasp emerge, you can see from the hole, and this is in fact one of the wasps that emerged from the psyllids. You may not realize it, but the more you apply pesticides, whether they be a fungicide, an insecticide, or a selective herbicide, the more chance you have of phytotoxic effect. It may be subtle at first. You may see a slightly reduced growth rate. You may not even realize that you have the slightly reduced growth rate. Sometimes you have increased risk of burn, particularly in combination with certain environmental conditions. And sometimes, let's say if you spray with copper too much, realize that's a fungicide, but you may induce a toxicity in the plant. So the less you can apply a product, the better. Okay, so this is the end of the information that we have prepared. The webinar will be made available at the NGIA YouTube channel, and we'll have a follow-up email and a link to a survey sent out to you later on today. If you had a question that you didn't ask during the webinar, you can email this Grow Help email address. It is attended by a number of people on our team, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So we'd like to thank our sponsors, Horti Innovation Australia, NGIA and Queensland Government, and we will move to final questions.
One for you, Andrew, with regard to pesticide resistance. Does combining products in a spray help reduce resistance?
Okay, so combining products can be used, yes, because you're effectively, in some ways, it's not a rotation, but it's more than one mode of action. It's targeting the individuals present in more than one way, and you're just going to have fewer individuals survive. What you have to be aware then is if you're going to be applying another product, it's best to avoid both of the products that were in that combination product. Otherwise, you could be reinforcing resistance to one of the products that was applied in that combination.
So if you're going to apply more than one product in a combination, they really need to be from different modes of action.
Yes, absolutely. If you're going to be combining products, definitely they need to be in different mode of action. Otherwise, you're doubling up. Exactly right.
And how many applications do you think it would take before you start seeing some resistance developing?
It is one of those cases, how long is a piece of string? It depends. There are some pests which have an extraordinary ability to develop pesticide resistance. Let's take two-spotted mite or western flower thrips and a number of different other pests, major pests for the nursery industry. Somehow the genetics of that species is such that they can develop resistance very quickly. Or there potentially could be a low-level underlying resistance present, and then if you apply the product to that population, you can get it out very quickly. So it does depend. If you're dealing with native plants and native pests on native plants, it's probably going to be a while. But if you're dealing with pests that have a history of pesticide resistance, you may have problems in as little as a handful of applications or even less. Now, before we do more questions, yes, I've put up a poll, and that is to simply gauge how many people were viewing the webinar at your computer. Thank you for those who have responded. Appreciate that. Are there further questions, John?
No, that's it. I think the information we've provided has been well received by everyone by the looks of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for attending our webinar. As I said earlier, it will be put on the NGIA YouTube channel along with the previous webinar from a fortnight ago and the ones that are coming out in a couple of fortnights' time. So thank you for attending, and thank you to our sponsors. All right. Goodbye, everyone.